Both of our stories today are about people who are just looking for a solution to their problems. However, the solutions they settle on and ultimately use wind up being the worst thing that ever happened to them. On March 15th, 2011, just after 1 p.m., 16-year-old Marcus Freeman sat behind the wheel of his dad's pickup truck, belting out the lyrics to one of his favorite songs on the radio as he and his girlfriend Carly drove down a highway in Northport, Florida. The pair had just left the dentist where Marcus had just gotten some dental work done, and in fact his jaw was pretty sore. But he was basically singing right now, as was Carly, in order to distract himself from the pain. And for the most part, this worked, but every time a song ended, it's like all he could think about was just how sore his jaw was. Marcus was not like your typical 16-year-old kid. He was sort of accustomed to having discomfort in his life, both physical discomfort and mental discomfort. And he really worked hard to be someone who was able to push through discomfort, including things like jaw pain. He was the quarterback of his varsity football team at his high school, Northport High. Over the last year, he'd really begun to focus on his physical fitness. He had begun doing these really difficult physical workouts that were sort of like vomit-inducing. He wanted to build up his stamina and strength so he could lead his team to victory. Marcus was pretty mentally well-adjusted, but nerves were definitely a thing. He was the quarterback of the varsity high school team, and he was only 16 years old. So, nerves before games and just generally some level of anxiety sort of existed in his life. To deal with this, he would work with a counselor at his school to try to overcome those nerves and try to manage those feelings when he was about to perform. All this hard work that Marcus was doing to become the strongest version of himself appeared to be paying off because the football team that he was the quarterback of, historically for years, they had been sort of terrible. But now, under Marcus's leadership, they were coming off one of their best seasons ever. Actually, it was not even just Marcus and the football team that appeared to be on the upswing these days. The whole school was. Northport High used to have terrible sports programs across the board and also low graduation rates and bad test scores. But now, it had totally turned a corner. Most of the sports programs were all improving. Grades and test scores were all improving. And also, students at this school just seemed happier and more well-adjusted. It was like everybody was doing better. There was one person to thank for this really positive change, Principal George Kenny. He'd been Northport's principal for a decade now, but in the last few years he'd made some tweaks to the curriculum and put a ton more focus on individual student support. The result of all of this appeared to be Marcus and all of his classmates thriving. But right now, the pain in Marcus's jaw was really all he could think about. The local anesthetic from the dentist was wearing off fast, and it felt like a dull, heavy throbbing. It seemed to be getting more severe, and it was starting to actually make him feel sort of dizzy. But Marcus had been working on pain management, and he sort of had some tactics and techniques that he would use when pain got sort of overwhelming. And so, Marcus took a deep breath and tried to relax and just think of anything else besides the pain. This was actually literally what he did during football games when he'd be super exhausted and beat up, but he had to find a way to push through that pain and keep going. And this is what he would do. He would do this mental exercise where he basically sort of let his mind drift away from the physical uncomfortability he was experiencing and just focus on other things. It was sort of like meditative and it generally worked, but this time it just didn't appear to be working. His jaw pain kept on throbbing. And then soon it sort of felt like the pain was growing, like it was radiating up his cheek into his whole head. But he stayed focused. He kept trying to allow his mind to sort of separate from the pain. And all of a sudden, that throbbing pain in his jaw stopped, and Marcus relaxed because truly the pain was now gone. At the same time, Carly was fiddling with the radio trying to find another good song to sing along to. Carly loved being with Marcus. She felt like Marcus was super kind and he was funny, and when she was with him, they could just talk and laugh for hours. Except now she realized that Marcus was acting unusual. He was being really quiet. And actually, when she looked over at him, she sort of gasped because Marcus appeared to have gone almost completely rigid. His arms were sort of stuck out in front of him, like gripping the steering wheel, but in this weird, stiff way. His hands were turning white from gripping the wheel as tightly as he could. And then also, his head was sort of tilted back, and his eyes actually were beginning to roll back into his head. Carly saw that literally his eyes were being taken off the road, and she began screaming his name and snapping and clapping and being like, "Hey, what are you doing?" But Marcus didn't answer. He didn't even react. He just continued blazing along at nearly 100 miles an hour in this weird, rigid state. Carly really began to panic. She's screaming. She's grabbing Marcus, trying to get him out of this trance he's in, but he just wouldn't move. He wouldn't look at her. It was like he was gone. And then Carly turned and looked out the windshield, and she screamed as the truck veered off the road and careened into a tree. And for Carly, as soon as that happened, everything went black. A few hours later, Carly opened her eyes in a hospital room. Then, the whole terrible ordeal came rushing back to her. She remembered Marcus and how strange he had looked, rigid at the wheel, and then she remembered crashing and hitting that tree. A nurse came into the room, and Carly immediately asked where Marcus was. But that's when she found out that Marcus was dead. Almost a month later, Carly was back at school, sitting in her Spanish class. Physically, she had healed from the accident, but emotionally, she had not. Marcus's death had truly devastated her, but perhaps the worst part of his death was there was just no good explanation for it. Like, why was he acting the way he was acting before they crashed? What happened to him? And truly, at this point, it was still just a huge mystery to basically everyone. Now, the media had come out and said that what happened was Marcus simply lost control of his vehicle. But Carly was right there with Marcus, and that did not seem like what happened. Again, Marcus went into this trance of sorts, and it was him being sort of locked in that position that ultimately caused the car to veer off the road at 100 miles an hour and crash. There was no bad weather, and there were no obstacles in the road. It was like whatever caused Marcus to freeze up is what caused the crash, but it was like nobody was talking about it. There were some theories about maybe what could have caused Marcus to act that way. People believed that maybe Marcus, when he was at the dentist, had gotten some kind of sedation that he had had a bad reaction to. Or maybe he had just had a random medical event. However, when his autopsy came out, it showed there had been no trace of drugs or any indication of a seizure, stroke, or aneurysm. So those theories were sort of pushed aside. But this tragedy was considered an accident, not any sort of foul play. So the police were not investigating. For Carly, it just was really difficult to sort of just go back to normal life when there was this huge hole in her life that just felt like it was never going to be filled. But Carly was not the only one grieving. After Mr. Kenny had notified the student body about Marcus's death, there had been a whirlwind of memorial services. And so now, as Carly sat there in her Spanish class, she suddenly heard the crackle of the school's announcement system. She heard Mr. Kenny's voice, and he said he had something to tell them. Carly could tell pretty much right away that whatever he was going to tell them was not going to be good news. Mr. Kenny's voice was very solemn, and there was a slight tremor to it as he began to speak. He cleared his throat, and then he just said, "Another Northport student has just died." In the weeks following that announcement, Carly tried to wrap her head around how it was possible that 2 students had died in 2 months. The second death was self-inflicted, but still, Northport was a small, tight-knit school where young people didn't just suddenly start dying. But then, just weeks later, in early May, Carly's confusion turned into outright disbelief when another Northport student died, also self-inflicted. This was the 3rd student to die in a matter of months, and this really sent Carly and the rest of the student body into a state of shock. Grieving families were desperate for answers, and the students were walking the hallways in absolute silence. It was like the entire student body was on edge, like almost bracing for more awful news. It just almost felt inevitable. However, one night soon after the 3rd death, Carly was at her home on her computer scrolling around on Facebook when she saw a post from another classmate. This person's post pointed out that all 3 of these deaths had one thing in common. Over the last 3 years, Mr. Kenny had been meeting with students and staff members to resolve various personal issues like people's anxiety or pain management or mental health issues. To do this, he put the students under hypnosis. Mr. Kenny would invite sometimes as many as 2 students a day into his office for these private, recorded hypnosis sessions. He even sometimes brought entire school sports teams into his office, and he would hypnotize them before games to improve performance. But critically, Mr. Kenny not only performed the hypnotism himself, he also taught the students how to do it on themselves. Mr. Kenny had only ever taken a brief course in hypnosis and certainly did not have a license to be using it to diagnose or resolve actual mental health or physical issues. A lot of kids really responded to his sessions and reported improvements. But along with these developments, there were some alarming side effects. Some parents reported that their children began experiencing strange personality changes, and they would have these blank stares on their faces. Others said their child became disoriented or began thinking about hurting themselves. And so, after the 3rd student death, that Facebook post that Carly found had revealed that all 3 of those students had been repeatedly hypnotized by Mr. Kenny. In Marcus's case, the reality of what happened in the truck became clear. When Marcus felt that overwhelming jaw pain and decided to use his special pain management technique, he was actually performing the self-hypnosis that Mr. Kenny had taught him. He fell into a deep, uncontrolled hypnotic trance while driving. Because he was in this self-induced state of deep hypnosis, his entire nervous system reacted by locking his physical body into place, turning his muscles completely rigid. This is why his hands gripped the wheel until they turned white, his arms froze straight out, his head tilted back, and his eyes rolled into his head. He was physically trapped in a hypnotic lock, unable to react to Carly's screams, unable to move his foot from the gas pedal, and unable to steer. It was this mental technique, taught to him by his own school principal, that caused him to drive his father's truck at 100 miles an hour directly into a tree, taking his own life and nearly killing Carly. When the truth came out, Mr. Kenny swore he was not responsible for these deaths, but he was charged with practicing therapeutic hypnosis without a license, and he did receive a year of probation. In addition, the Sarasota County School Board paid a total of $600,000 to the three victims' families. And as for Mr. Kenny, he has since retired from teaching, leaving behind a community haunted by the bizarre and devastating consequences of his secret sessions. It is a terrifying thought that a simple desire to find a solution to your problems can lead to such a horrific outcome, whether it is a high school student looking for pain relief or a career criminal looking for an easy way to make some quick cash on a cold night. For Anthony Irvin, his problem was a constant lack of money, and his solution was to prey on his neighbors. But just like Marcus, his choice of a solution would lead to his ultimate downfall. At 8 p.m. on October 9, 1996, 31-year-old Anthony Irvin walked down a dark sidewalk in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania towards a local grocery store. It was not that cold outside, but it was kind of windy and it was dark. Anthony only had a light jacket on, and so he wasn't feeling that comfortable. He pulled his jacket tight around him as he walked, and as he was walking, all he wanted to do was just go home where it was warm. But he couldn't. He really needed money first. Once he had money, then he could go home. Anthony had a pretty tough life, and for the most part, he really was just a career criminal. He had not had a regular job in a very long time, and instead, when he needed money, like tonight, he would steal from local businesses or he would mug people. In the past 9 years, he'd been arrested 8 times for things like robbery and assault. And so, for the most part, he was just a huge nuisance to the people in this neighborhood. Even if they felt bad for him, he was just a problem. But despite how often he committed crimes, his crimes were always relatively petty. And so, he really didn't serve much time at all in prison. He always ended up back out on the street, and he always ended up continuing to be a problem. But tonight, though, as Anthony walked down the road, he was not thinking about how his behavior impacted his neighbors. He was thinking about finding some place or someone to rob. And tonight in particular, he thought, I'm going to look for a person. I need a target. And so he's walking down the road, and he actually began to get kind of worried because it seemed like it was quieter than usual out on the street, like there was nobody out here. And he started to worry that if he didn't find somebody soon, he was going to be out of luck with no money. But just then, right up ahead, a young man turned the corner and began walking up the sidewalk in Anthony's direction. He was sort of a smaller, younger-looking guy. He appeared to be all alone. And right away, Anthony thought, perfect, I have my mark. I'm going to rob this guy. And so Anthony, he begins walking towards this unsuspecting young man. And as he got closer, Anthony realized he knew who this guy was. This was Harry, his neighbor. He thought, perfect. Because I know Harry is super soft-spoken and gentle. Like, he's so calm. He's not going to do anything. He's going to be so easy to rob. Yeah, it's horrible to rob your neighbor. He's going to know I did it, but what's he going to do? So Anthony marches right up to Harry, and he stops right in front of him, blocking his path. And then Anthony delivers his classic mugging threat, demanding that Harry hand over everything. A few minutes later, a Philadelphia detective named Perry Kelly drove his cruiser fast down a city street. He'd been called to the area about a mugging, and he was hopeful he would get there in time to potentially catch the mugger, or at least see who they were, or see where they went so that maybe he could catch them. And so Kelly, he turns the corner and he pulls up in front of the address where he's been told to go. And as he's pulling up, he sees there are 2 men out on the sidewalk. One is lying motionless on the ground, and the other is sitting on top of him. And Kelly's thinking, perfect, I have caught the mugger. Like, he's the one on top of the other. I've caught him in the act. Great, I'm going to jump out of the car and arrest this guy. But no, when Kelly got out of the car and learned what actually happened here, this became easily the strangest thing he had ever come across in his career. So, when Anthony mugged people, what he would do is he would put his hand into his coat pocket and he would press his fingers forward like he had a gun in his pocket. He would sort of aim his hand inside of his jacket towards the person he was mugging, and he would say to them as soon as he walked up to them, like, hey, I got a gun. Give me all your money or I'm going to shoot you. And they would often look down. They'd see what they thought was a gun in his jacket, although they couldn't be sure. And instead of questioning whether really Anthony had a gun or not, they would just hand over their money. Like it wasn't worth it. Here, take my money. And Anthony would take their money and run off, right? So this worked most of the time, and he's thinking, Harry, here's my easy mark. This young, meek kid, I'm going to use the same thing on him. It's going to be so easy. And so he walks up to Harry and literally stands in front of him and blocks his way. And Harry actually kind of walks into him and is like, what's going on? And Anthony, he delivers the line. He's got his hand in the pocket pretending he's got his gun. And he's like, hand over all your money or I'm going to shoot. But Harry, whether or not he believed that Anthony had a gun or not, he actually had virtually no way of confirming it one way or another because Harry was actually blind. And Anthony knew Harry was blind because they were neighbors. And that was a big reason why he thought this was going to be so easy. I'm going to rob the slight blind kid. That's what I'm going to do. But what Anthony didn't realize is that in addition to being blind, Harry also happened to be a karate master and a master wrestler as well. And so, when Harry was suddenly being told, you're going to get shot if you don't hand over your money, his instincts kicked in. Because Harry could not see a gun, he did not experience the visual cue of intimidation that usually caused Anthony's victims to freeze or comply. Instead, Harry's highly trained senses and years of physical conditioning took over in a fraction of a second. He reached out, grabbed Anthony's outstretched arm and collar, and with perfect leverage, flipped him over his shoulder, slamming him headfirst onto the concrete sidewalk. The impact was devastating, instantly breaking Anthony's neck and killing him. Harry then sat on top of his body to keep him pinned, completely unaware that Anthony was already dead, and waited patiently until the police arrived. When Detective Kelly got out of his cruiser, he was expecting to find a terrified victim and a fleeing criminal. Instead, he found Harry sitting calmly on top of the motionless body of Anthony Irvin. Harry explained to the detective that this man had stopped him, claimed to have a gun, and threatened to shoot him, so Harry had defended himself using his arts training. An investigation quickly verified Harry's account. It turned out that Anthony did not actually have a gun in his pocket. He was merely posturing. Because Harry was blind, he had no way of knowing it was a bluff, and he had reacted to what he reasonably believed was an imminent threat to his life. Harry was never charged in connection with Anthony's death since it was determined he acted entirely in self-defense. And even though the media called him a hero for defending himself, Harry actually felt terrible that he had killed Anthony. He didn't mean to, he was just protecting himself. And so, he called the whole thing a tragedy. Harry had spent the last 15 years of his life training in specialized martial arts programs. When he lost his sight at a young age, his parents wanted to make sure he had a way to defend himself and feel confident navigating the world. They enrolled him in a local karate school that specialized in training individuals with disabilities. Harry spent hours every day practicing, learning how to listen to the shifting weight of an opponent, how to sense movement through air currents, and how to use the ground to feel the vibrations of approaching footsteps. Over time, he became a karate black belt and a champion wrestler. He knew exactly how to dismantle a threat in a matter of seconds. When Anthony stood in front of him, Harry could smell the stale tobacco on his jacket and hear the rapid, nervous breathing. He knew the man was incredibly close and highly aggressive. So, when Anthony shouted his threat, Harry didn't hesitate. His body reacted before his conscious mind could even process the fear. He stepped inside Anthony's reach, grabbed his sleeve, and threw him over his shoulder with perfect form. When Detective Perry Kelly examined the scene, he was stunned. In his career on the force, he had never seen a robbery attempt fail so spectacularly or so instantly. He looked at Harry, who was sitting there quietly, waiting for the officers to tell him what to do next. Harry's clothes were slightly dusty from the scuffle, but otherwise, he was completely unharmed. Kelly looked down at Anthony Irvin, a man he had arrested multiple times in the past. It was a bizarre twist of fate that Anthony's long career of petty crimes had ended on a dark sidewalk at the hands of the very neighbor he thought would be his easiest target. The community was shocked when the news broke. Many local business owners who had been targeted by Anthony in the past openly celebrated Harry's actions. But Harry refused to take any pride in what had happened. He retreated from the public eye, turning down interview requests from local television stations and newspapers. He spent his days quietly at home, trying to find peace after such a violent encounter. He often spoke about how he wished Anthony had simply asked him for help instead of trying to rob him. For Harry, the physical victory was a devastating emotional loss. He had spent his entire life learning how to protect people, and the fact that his skills had been used to take a life, even in self-defense, was something that weighed heavily on his soul. Both of our stories today show how a desperate search for answers, or an easy way out, can lead to a tragic end. The consequences can be devastating. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya!